Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Murdoch. I'm the Artistic Director of Alchemy Theater. Thank you all so much for being here for our West Virginia Shakespeare Winterfest. Woo! Woo! It seems like only yesterday we were doing the Fall Fest, and now here we are doing the Winterfest. We can do these free workshops because we get a major grant from the West Virginia Humanities Council every year. They are instrumental in the work that we do here for the West Virginia Shakespeare Festival, and we are very proud of working with them. Tonight, boy, do we have a treat for you. This is Dr. Jeffrey Ruff. He has a BA and an MA from Missouri State University and a PhD from the University of California. He is a professor at Marshall University in the Humanities Department. With his university students, he has performed and done readings of several Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit dramas and epics such as Oedipus the King and Lysistrata, and he has been a contributor to Marshall's annual multimedia show, Body Shots. Jeffrey lives in Huntington with several charming and wondrous creatures, including his wife, Kimball, his children, Lydia and Samuel, his mother, Linda, and assorted animals, including cats, axolotls, and others. He has blessed us with his talents on stage as well here many times. We are very glad to have him. He's also spoken at one of our other Shakespeare festivals, so we're very glad to have him back today to talk to us about universal themes in literature. He will discuss and lead attendees through this workshop involving the sovereign hero and the sorcerer, Once Upon a Time, the maid and mother and crone, the world is ending, why a fairy tale is different from an epic, the problem of genre and themes in the Mary Sue and Marty Stew problem. So without further ado, please, let's hear it for Dr. Jeffrey Ruff.
Thanks, Mike. How y'all doing today?
Pretty good.
Okay, good. I move around a lot, so maybe I'll be all over the place. But I want to tell you how I started thinking about this, and that is I do a literature class, and in classics and philosophy and history of religions, you do a lot of literature across the world. And so I immediately had some very specific themes that I thought could be really useful. And I sort of basically prepared this workshop, and then I thought, I wonder what people say when asked what are universal themes in literature, because I just did what I have been doing in the classroom for 20 years and didn't really think about what anyone else might be doing. And so I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll ask an AI chatbot of some kind. And so I asked a whole bunch of different ones what universal themes in literature were, and none of them came up with anything that was very interesting. And I found that interesting because I wanted to figure out, now why do I think about this question differently than you can search on Google or you can get an AI to generate you something. And what the AIs generated or what Google searches generated were things like the universal theme in Charlotte Webb by E.B. White, one of my favorites, is friendship can be found in unlikely places. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. But that doesn't seem like either the most interesting or relevant theme of Charlotte's Web to me. For Romeo and Juliet, it was passion is costly. For Frankenstein, for Frankenstein, it was knowledge and unbridled ambition can be dangerous. And so apparently, when thinking about universal themes, we come up with stuff like love conquers all. One of the reasons it would never have dawned on me to do a workshop on love conquers all, because somebody give me an example of a story where love conquers all. Charlotte's Web, okay. It's a Wonderful Life. So somebody give me examples of very important stories where love does not conquer all.
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet. So see, that's a problem. If you make your universal things so big that they fit anything and don't exclude anything, then I'm not clear what it does for us. I mean, sure, it might you might be a middle schooler, and it might help you generate a thesis so you can write a kind of canned essay. But I found these 5 or something like them as 5 universal themes in literature. And I think with every one you can come up with an example and a counterexample. And something about that I didn't like. The other one was good beats evil. The Hobbit is a good example of, good winning out over evil. And every horror story I have ever heard or read is usually the opposite thesis or some version of that. And then there's also real life, where I'm not sure that good always wins out over evil. Family is more important, is the most important thing. And I thought of the Pandava brothers in the Mahabharata epic, because those 5 brothers stick through even, the end of the world. But then I also thought of Cinderella and Cain and Abel and Lilith and Adam. And the list just kept, or Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, Medea and Jason. And I thought, wow, sometimes blood is not thicker than blood. And Beauty in the Eye of the Beholder, I thought of Beauty and the Beast, kind of instantly. But one of the things that I wanted to do is talk about some themes that I think are universal, whether there's a happy ending or a sad ending. And that are universal because they may express not a universal belief that human beings have, because I think that sometimes human beings have beliefs that are universal and also false. And so that's problematic. And so I wanted to talk about universal things that I thought were both valuable, would help us have some kind of insight instead of just map something. And also, maybe, at least we could explore and we could discuss and we could debate and we could consider that they might be true. Or at least they might have a kind of truth value that was challenging instead of boring. And one of the things that a theme, which is just a generic pattern that we can find across multiple examples, sometimes type and archetype is used this way, sometimes theme. That's different from plot, and I will talk about that just briefly in a minute to give us an example of why a theme is sort of different than a storyline. But there are themes that express fundamental metaphors that human beings hold. And those are things that are often ideas that sit behind our ideas or underneath our ideas, or the things that our ideas stand on. And those might be things like life is a journey, as opposed to life is a war. So we have both those themes, or both of those fundamental metaphors in the Western world. The idea that life is a fight, and you're either winning or losing. But sometimes we also have the idea that life or love or important things might be a kind of journey that we go on, and we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going in a certain direction, and we'll have landmarks along the way. And so that's one way to think about themes. Another one is that maybe a really good theme expresses something that theaters and actors are really concerned about, and that is something like a comportment or an attitude, or a place when your body and your words and your thoughts and your emotions are all leaning in the same direction. So if we think about in theater, where part of what you want to do is when you're acting is to be fully present to that moment. And that your gestures work that way, and your thoughts work that way, and then your lines come out naturally instead of in a kind of strained way. And that's about having a certain kind of attitude. And that's about having a certain kind of comportment. And one of the things I like about that kind of word when we're talking about universal themes is that it comes from a variety of different places, but one of those is from dance. So if you're a dance partner or a lone dancer, how you're holding yourself in space, it always matters. That's what we mean by dance. And if you're dancing with a partner, then you're either leading or following, or you're cooperating in some kind of way. And so all your movements have to work maybe like birds in a flock or fish in a school, where everything moves at the same time. And if it's all moving correctly, if the comportment or the attitude is right, then everything runs smoothly. Another source of this kind of notion that a theme needs to express a certain kind of comportment is when you're sailing, either in a little tiny, raft with a bedsheet sail, or to the largest of boats that use sails, is you need to be able to move in all directions, except the wind typically is only blowing from one direction at a time, or it certainly isn't blowing in all directions all the time. And so what a sail does is allows you, because of your attitude, the sail's attitude or the sail's comportment, it allows you to move regardless. And so you can move into the wind, or you can tack, or you can go across the wind. You can you need to get over there, but the wind's not blowing in a favorable way. You can kind of creep along getting there by using your sail in a certain kind of way. And one of the important ways that we can set an attitude in a kind of universal way is there's all kinds of stories that the story wants to be able to be understood by anybody in any place. And not all stories are this way. Some stories are very specifically for one audience and not for another audience. But one of the ways to do that, you can say once upon a time, or in a galaxy far, far away. Or if you set something in this once upon a time place, it's not anywhere in particular, and the implication is that anybody can be there. Anybody can come with you on this storytelling. It's not and let's think about the contrast. Stories can give people ethnic identity, or social identity, or national identity. Stories can tell their origin, or what their personality is, or what place they're from. And so one aspect of storytelling is to make differences between people. Here's my story, and I'm from this place, and I believe this, and here's my name. And that makes me unique and different from people that live across the river, or lived a long time ago, or all of those kinds of things. And so inasmuch as storytelling is in part an identity constructing, or an identity projecting sort of activity, the story that's once upon a time, a long time ago in a place far away, that's meant to let us know we're not talking about our individual identity or a particular group of people or some closed community, but instead we're talking to everybody. We're talking to anyone who can interact with and enjoy the plot and the themes of this story. And that long time ago in a place far, far away, or once upon a time, means that story is always and forever. So it's not anything in particular, but it is everything in general. And so that's a very good way to think about what kind of story you're reading or seeing or thinking or hearing. Is it a story that's making everything the same, or is trying to speak to everyone, or is it a story that's only speaking to a people that belong to a particular community? And so that'll tell you different kinds of things. The next one, and I'm bringing these up in a different order than I put on my little blurb, but the next one is about beginnings and endings. And what's the theme of Chicken Little? Do you guys know the story of Chicken Little?
It's the sky is falling.
The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to stump people with my complex intellectual Chicken Little challenge. How about, have you ever heard anyone say, well, back in my day, or back in the good old days, or the kids today. And so all of those are phrases that signal what?
Things used to be better.
Things in the past used to be better. And this theme is the Golden Age theme. And the Golden Age theme is that there's some time a long time ago where human beings were all decent and good, and they were tall and long-lived, and they didn't have any problems. And, every apple tree, produced, delicious apples that, fell into your palm as you approached or whatever. And that, by implication, today is what?
Worse.
Thumb down, yeah, Dark Age, Golden Age versus the Dark Age, and this theme is that in some long ago time, far away. Again, we've got a once upon a time. It is a once upon a time kind of story, and once upon a time, things were all awesome, and they were great, and people were good, and everything was decent, and it's all going to crap. It's going to hell in a handbasket. We're in a dark age. The Hindu tradition calls it the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, and we call the Middle Ages, as compared to the classical period, the Dark Ages, and so this theme, if you're a historian or a social scientist, it's really hard to find examples of when any society actually works like this. So it's really hard to find any practical human social example of where things are totally awesome and they degrade slowly over time. Or the reverse, which is the myth of progress, or the Brave New World. That is, things used to be crap, things used to be awful, things used to be savage and primitive and stupid and poor, and everybody was dirty, and they only lived till they were 37 years old. But now, everybody's beautiful and better fed, and it could be the scientific sort of theme of that we have antibiotics, and that's what made it different, or we have supercomputers in our pocket in the form of cell phones, and that's what made it better, or that, there's different ways. And in our society right now today, you will find some people who are living in a world that had a golden age a long time ago, and it is now degenerating into a barbaric dark age. And you will find other people in the same society, in the same neighborhoods, who prefer the story that is, it used to be an awful place to live, when everybody had lice and rickets. And now we're in a brave new world that's progressive and sort of moving into an amazing future. And so when you frame a story, or when you're hearing a story, or when you're interacting a story, it is going to signal to you assumptions. It will signal things to you that you will already have assumptions in common with it. And many people can simultaneously hold the idea that there once was a golden age and today is garbage, and things were primitive and stupid in the past, and they're smart and progressive in the present. And one of the problems with that kind of theme is that we can simultaneously believe they're both true at the same time. And this shows us one of the problems with themes that's like love conquers all, or blood is thicker than water, is that you can have a universal theme and human beings believe it, and human beings can hold that to be true, and in some cases it doesn't do any work for them. So it's not a particularly creative theme, it's not a particularly helpful theme. It may be a theme that causes them to limit their view of the world, as opposed to, say, expanding their view of the world. And so themes are weird. They don't necessarily do nice things to them. They can limit our imagination as well as free it. And so, so one of the ones that I want to talk about is the sorcerer and the sovereign, or the king and the wizard, or the queen and the witch, or this theme that I think, instead of a sort of abstract emotional notion of love does this, or romance does that, or good is this, or evil is that, but instead, this is a universal theme in literature, one, because we find it in literature all over the world. And two, it doesn't tell us in advance whether it's going to be a happy story or a sad story, but it does tell us something about storytelling, and it does tell us something about what might be going on in the story. And so I invite you all to take like a minute and grab your pieces of paper and write down a ruler and wizard title or theme or story that you're familiar with. And it could be a wizard or a witch. So it's a magic user and somebody in power. And write down a list of them and take 30 seconds or a minute to do that. Just jot a few down. And then we're going to ask some questions about them. And we're going to see, workshop style, whether this works as a universal theme in literature and what maybe universal themes might do for us. Everybody got some ideas? Got some ideas out there? Somebody holler out to me a sorcerer and a sovereign that you are familiar with from storytelling.
Arthur and Merlin.
Arthur and Merlin. Arthur and Merlin are for Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Gaelic culture. That's a fundamental story. And what is the story of Arthur and Merlin in any of its versions? Just in its simplest form.
He's his advisor. Merlin is his advisor.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we unlock with this sorcerer sovereign is that oftentimes they're in storytelling, and in a way that now I think makes sense to us and in a kind of an important way, is that people with great gifts or talents, or people who are in control, or people who are who have power or are destined to have power, have mentors and advisors. And this sorcerer and sovereign theme is talking about the problem of having power and knowing how to use it properly. And so, so you've got Merlin, who's a tutor and a mentor to young King Arthur, and what other ones did you come up with?
Genie and Aladdin I had, which was that same kind of
So
idea.
Genie and Aladdin, and in many versions of that story, but I'll use the Disney version because people today often know that one, Jafar is also a sorcerer, and the king is a king. And so the Aladdin story in the popular version that we have it in our pop culture uses this theme more than once and differently. Another one.
Simba and Rafiki.
Yeah, that's a great one. And so we've got a witch or a wizard or a shaman or a healer or a storyteller. And so oftentimes from our theatrical or storytelling perspective, what we fantastically mean by mentor or wizard is storyteller, is someone who knows all of our stories or knows the stories and the storyteller. We have fantasy literature and fairy tales that oftentimes make us preoccupied with the magical powers of the sorcerer or the witch or the wizard. But in this universal theme, it's actually their advising, it's their mentoring that are far more important than they can make fire, or they can have a flying carpet, or they can do something that's magically powerful. That's often incidental, and that's often there for entertainment value, because that's another thing that stories do. Stories charm and entertain and amuse us. They make us feel strong emotions, and they sort of activate us in an emotional context. And so the magical powers that the sorcerer in this theme has are oftentimes part of the action and adventure and excitement. But the theme underlying that is that the reason that this character is important and represents a kind of important theme of storytelling is that there's someone who knows the stories. And there's someone who knows how to apply those to life. So oftentimes we think of parables or fables or children's stories as having a moral, or all kinds of stories having a moral. We just finished The Crucible, and it seems to me that it has a moral, or it has a message that seems powerful and meaningful and timeless in certain kinds of ways. And so getting advice from the wise mentor is at the basis of this theme, because people in power have power, and they have the ability to exercise power. And so they may not know how to use that, because like Arthur, they might be young at the beginning of or Luke Skywalker, they might be young. They might be, they're not finished sort of developing yet, and so they need that mentoring. And so what can go wrong with power? So what we're moving on to now is what are the different sides or permutations? How come this is not a good story or an evil story, but it's just a universal theme that teaches us something about how to have an attitude about stories and about the content of the stories? And so the ruler or the sovereign or the hero, what can go wrong with having all that power?
Corruption.
Corrupts it.
Yeah, say more.
Corruption.
So corruption, dark side, darkness, corruption, and corruption. What are we? I mean, that totally sounds right. But why do we use the word corruption for power used wrongly? And we use the word for naughtiness, when a child sticks a ballpoint pen in a outlet.
Wouldn't corruption indicate that it once was good?
Yeah, so what this is not just run-of-the-mill naughtiness. It's not like having an extra cookie or something. Corruption is something like there's something important and there's something good, and it can be spoiled.
Taking all the cookies.
It can be destroyed. It can be undermined. It can be torn down. And so powerful, heroic figures can go wrong, and we have examples of that with Achilles and Arthur, for that matter, and Arthur's number one homicidal sidekick, Lancelot, who murders probably more people in storytelling than any other murderer. Maybe Deadpool has a bigger body count, but Lancelot. And so a powerful hero who is a great warrior or a powerful sovereign can go wrong. And so they need a mentor. They need this sorcerer, witch, wizard, wise woman, wise man, storyteller to sort of pass on the wisdom of many generations to try to help them, because the power itself is seductive. and this is one thing, this is another kind of theme, is that the power itself is potentially corrupting because it makes you act without license or restraint or limit because you can. And if you've ever met a toddler, you know, you understand why, yeah.
So, like I think a good example of that is like the masters in A Song of Ice and Fire, right? Like they make their chains and they do their business. They retell the stories of the past Targaryens or the past, you know, everybody coming down through, and they have some modicum of respect for some reason or another. Don't necessarily have any real wizard powers, right? In that world, in
Yeah.
that literary world, just
Well,
maybe some alchemical.
We were just talking about that too, because all of the main characters in Song of Ice and Fire have that person. So Arya goes over and the girl has no name,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so like Martin works it in over and over and over.
Yeah.
And
There's-
Stannis and that
like,
lady,
yeah,
the
like-
Grey Witch, yeah.
yeah. The Red Witch and Stannis, like there's like literally everybody throughout that series has somebody that is their sort of go-to thing. And in a very similar way to Star Wars, not exactly the same, but you know, there's you know, Obi-Wan, or there's Yoda, or there's you know,
Well, the Sith and the
there's
Emperor.
Palpatine and you know, whoever. But I got what the question I wanted to get to was what about things like the Telchines, or in Greek literature, like or even if the witch is like the daughter of the sovereign, like Cersei or something like that. Like how does that weigh out?
Across storytelling, there's a very common theme that this sorcerer or wizard kind of person are often married into or matched up with or sort of part of the social crowd that are also the sovereigns. And so this is in the, excuse me, in the ideal form, Galahad, who is in some of these storytelling traditions of the Arthurian legends, he got both versions, or he got both parts of it right, because he's as successful and skilled and talented a fighter as his dad Lancelot, but he's chaste and noble and honest and loyal. He has all these romantic chivalry values, and so he got the kind of values that you're supposed to impart in order to be this kind of noble wielder of power, defender of the weak sort of thing. And in most of the previous generation would strive for those morals, but none of them had it, like Lancelot and his murderous rages or others. And so, and then daughters who can also be witches, so princesses who can also be witches, or princesses who are very specifically mentored by fairy godmothers or evil witches, and how they turn out might be a transition shift for the theme of the maiden, the mother, and the crone, which is another one I wanted to talk about. And that is, there's a concept that there's certain kinds of specialty themes that very specifically have to do with females, or that they get their own special kinds of stories in the history of storytelling that that in a lot of ways in our world we don't have very good versions of this, or we don't have very complete or coherent. What we've got is a jigsaw puzzle of bits and pieces of these stories, and so I want to work hard on answering your question, but I want to insert one more piece from the sorcerer and the sovereign first, and then with maiden, mother, and crone return to that, because I think we've got a special case with Cersei and Medea, and but also Sleeping Beauty. I mean, there's a bunch of these where one of the things that the princess is one of her sovereignty powers is that she can be both witch and ruler, like a philosopher king. But instead, that typically speaking in storytelling, we only see women who can be powerful and wise both. Typically, men cannot be powerful and wise successfully because of certain kinds of problems of violence. And I don't know if we can answer all that, but I guess that's part of what makes it a universal theme. But circling back to my Jafar example is what's the problem with educators?
They could tell you wrong.
Louder?
They could teach you wrong.
Yeah, they could be woke or they could be evil. That was a joke.
They don't get paid enough.
Huh?
They don't get paid enough. That's what's wrong with it.
So the wizard or the sorcerer or the witch who has all this knowledge, all this arcane and hard to get, hard to borrow knowledge, and this is what alchemy and scholarship and elemental magical power is indicating a kind of expertise that can only take a long period of study. You don't just roll out of bed in the morning and become a wise mentor. You have to have numerous experiences with the School of Hard Knocks and lots of study and lots of sacrifice and lots of deprivation. And so one of the things this theme tells us is if you're in the position to be a mentor, you're going to have done a lot of homework of some kind. And again, in an action adventure, that may be throwing fireballs and flying through the air. In a more calm or sort of humdrum meaning of life kind of drama, that may just be the old grocery store clerk that's wise, or getting advice from grandma in the kitchen. Just someone who's had a lot of experience and has spent a lot of time at their craft, at their art, at their form of knowledge. They're often and mastery is often depicted in very real hands-on ways. So if you ever know someone who could bake, you can follow a recipe and it won't turn out the same way for everybody. If you encounter and interact with someone who's a fine and does refined carpentry, you can have a saw and a hammer and a nail and somehow not end up with the same thing. And so this right stuff kind of notion that an expert can have is not a thing that you can just throw out the expert and you can get it without them, because it's only comes from years of expert study. And then the problem with that is they could be a villain, or they could have a bad attitude, or they could have bad motivations. And oftentimes this is the idea of that this person is a great football player or a great carpenter or a great weaver or a great baker, or is old and has lots of experience or went to the famous wizard school or whatever. And so we know that they succeeded at homework for a very long time, but their comportment or their attitude might be wrong. Their ego might be distorted. They might have bad motivations. They might be selfish. They might want to win. And that's the Jafar character. And there's an evil yogi in a whole bunch of Indian stories that basically mind controls the king or the queen to do what the evil yogi wants. And that's, it's basically the sovereign and the sorcerer shows us baked into it and built into it a series of ideal circumstances and automatic problems that can go wrong. The sovereign can go wrong, the sorcerer can go wrong, and so everybody has to be in some kind of balance for that to work right. Now, transitioning to the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone, the basic structure of the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone is that the Maiden is doesn't have to be a little girl, although that's the typical fairy tale sort of image. But any chaste, virginal female can fit that maiden category. And so adult women who are nuns, for example, still fit the maiden category. Or the goddess Athena, who has no masculine partner in Greek mythology, fits the maiden category. She's a strategies and tactics and social values goddess. So she's kind of a warfare goddess, and she's an adult, and she's depicted in arts and statuary as a sexually mature female, but she goes in the maiden category because sex is not part of her story. So being a mother is not part of her story. She's not going that path in life. And so either immature or young women, or women who do not engage in a sort of family lifestyle, motherhood, grandmotherhood, women who don't fit that type go into this maiden category. And that is, they don't use they're either immature or they don't use their powers of sexuality to sort of either have sex or make more humans, which one of those is the love goddess and the other one is the mommy goddess. But those are mature sort of female images. And that's the mother category. And the mother category can be a reproducing mother, or it can be just someone who's of mothering age and so mature. So a grown-up, someone who's fully empowered with their adult powers, and so so the mother doesn't have to be a category in fairy tales and storytelling and in this theme who actually is married and has kids. She doesn't have to actually be a mom. She needs to be a secure and empowered, sexually mature woman, and that's really the core of that theme. And it's often called motherhood because in traditional societies that was a social value in many ways. And then the crone, or the hag, or the wicked witch, the third version of that is really a post-fertility maturity measure. It's modeled on older human women who are no longer their reproductive sexuality in their youth is not the main driving part of their identity. And that one splits into wicked witches, who sort of are old hags, but it also has the wise midwife, or the storyteller, or Deborah, the last, one of the judges of Israel. Or we've got this mature woman, sort of wise woman, crone kind of image, and this repeats itself in the most cartoonish form in fairy tales. So we'll have a princess who's a maiden. And we'll have a wicked witch, and then we might have a mentor figure in the middle that's a fairy godmother. Like you could have all three of them at the same time, or you can have two of the three, or maybe all the socially normal people in the story are represented by that middle mother category, and you've got an evil witch and a maiden or a damsel. And so one of the reasons that this theme shows up so repeatedly, and in everything from its very cartoonish form to its much more serious permutations, like in the Greek, the women's roles in many of the Greek plays, Antigone, maiden, Medea, crone.
You'd say Medea's a crone and not a mother?
What'd she do to her children?
Well, yeah,
But who would the nurse be to her?
Yeah, so the nurse is a voice of reason. So it's like a mentoring, it's like that. So Medea, first and foremost, is a great character because we see her personify all those different characteristics across the Jason cycle, which we don't have the epic. We don't have the Jason epic in its original form. We probably do, because the Odyssey is probably a plagiarism of the Jason epic. The Jason epic's older, and the Odyssey probably follows the Jason story pretty closely. We know all the episodes, or many episodes from the Jason story, because it's all over art in the ancient world, and there's fragments of it. And then much later, there's the Argonautica, which sort of retells that story. But there's a very old Greek epic that's, Jason and the Argonauts, and Medea is a princess maiden witch whose magical power helps slay the dragon. And then she escapes or is kidnapped, depending on how you read this story, by Jason, and she lives an empowered, middle-aged mother-era life. And then she gets old, and Jason finds a new wife and forgets to tell her. And this leads to negative consequences. Now, the oldest versions of that story that we have are unlike the theater Medea, in that the oldest versions of that story seem to say that Medea killed our children because they were going to be murdered, and so it's a kind of a mercy killing, or it's like that last episode of MASH. It's a reflection on the problems of motherhood and violence, and that children are in danger when you're in danger, and instead the playwrights, and some of the brilliance of the playwrights is the Greek audience that showed up to Medea was already familiar with this story and knew all knew the whole story, but they get the twist of that she did it on purpose, and it's like, it would have been a big spoiler or a big surprise, and it's shocking, and so Circe and Calypso, and we have Chudala in the Indian tales. We have a number of figures across myth and storytelling and fairy tale. And this in fact, this maiden mother crone cycle is generated as the symbolic pair equal to the hero's journey. So in the modern world, we tend to think of the hero's journey as a generic thing, and we'll retell a story with a masculine hero or a feminine hero, and we make them empowered according to the model of the hero's journey. So basically, we turn all males and females into Jason or Odysseus, in the simplest version of that. Whereas in the ancient and medieval world, they didn't tell empowered female stories according to the hero's journey. They told them in the cycle of the maiden, the mother, and the crone, and how that can go right and how it can go wrong. And so this is a for women or for female or for female symbols, and just like male and femaleness and any kind of fusion and transformations in between those concepts, themes are infinitely more flexible than actual human beings and actual societies. And so you can invert and reverse all these themes, and you can switch them back and forth, and you can do all kinds of these. And from a storytelling perspective, there's no reason for us to worry about that. If it makes a better story, then let it be a good story. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring up the sovereign and the sorcerer and the maid, the mother, and the crone is because they offer us two non-stereotypical, not necessarily masculinized models of hero, which we get in the hero's journey, which I could have started with that as a universal theme in literature. But one, we know that one really well. We often think that's the only one, and we're often not attentive to that's a male story, or it's in its stereotypical or its thematic form. It's the coming of age story for males. And the coming of age story for females is the maiden mother crone story, traditionally and sort of historically. And the sovereign and the sorcerer is not masculine or feminine, either one. It's about power and mentoring, and so it can be gendered however the story, whatever setting the story has and wherever it fits. And so now let's think back to Mike's question. if you have a tribal or regional rulership pattern in which males make political decisions in public and with strangers, and women make empowered social decisions relative to commerce and the family, and not with strangers, because strangers are dangerous, then the idea of the sorcerer and the sovereign would be, we want all males and females to be good at both of these things, because if you are royalty, you're going to have to deal with strangers and you're going to have to manage a kingdom. And so some of what's at the root, or what one of the desired morals to this story structure, is that it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. If you're an aristocrat or a ruler, and that's this story was told to and for, then you want all your little boys and girls to grow up and be able to do both. And Ice and Fire is a great example of an author who's aware of this and who has both his male and his female characters developing, in that the aristocrats have a different kind of development. Now, why is this important in the modern period? And that's not just a rhetorical question. I have an answer to this very specifically in mind that you should be able to puzzle through. So one of the things we mean by bourgeoisie and democracy, one of the things we literally mean by those things, is not how we govern ourselves in sort of procedural patterns. It means that everybody gets aristocratic habits, and so that's the myth or theme or imaginary goal of modernity, is that we all get to be aristocrats, and that's what capitalism and democracy allows in the Western world, is that you get to have what used to be only the possessions of aristocrats, which include individuality, romantic love, and empowerment. And so, in some senses, although I cheated a little bit and I gave you an aristocratic mentoring story that was only good for Marcus Aurelius and, and the people he's writing his meditations to, which is a lot of classical and ancient literature. But one of our hopes, but also one of our conceits in modernity, is that we all get to have that. And so that makes me think about wanting to combine the hero's journey, the maiden mother and the crone, and the sovereign and the sorcerer as a triple pattern of trying to understand how to live a meaningful and empowered life with sort of moral guidelines, or at least some kind of values. And then now let's go back to Circe. The same thing can go wrong with your child if she's trained in the magic. That can go wrong with the mentor. And that is, if you're just a dopey ruler who dopily does everything by force, which is both the buffoon and the wise examples of kingship. So I remember, and I think this is probably American cultural truism that may come out of movies and television from the mid-20th century, or it may be kind of a literary thing. It's certainly not an academic or an intellectual idea, but I've heard it my whole life, is that sort of like, well, monarchy is really the best form of government. It's just, you can't know in advance whether the monarch's going to be good or bad, but it's the best form of government. Why? Are you familiar with this stereotype that exists profoundly across our culture?
Efficiency.
It's efficient. You don't have red tape. You don't have bureaucracy. You can do things fast. You can do things fast just because you said so. And that's good because it's efficient. And that's interesting because one of the things that we see Merlin tell Arthur and every other mentor in every one of these stories, where the mentor is not a con artist or an evil wizard, but is instead some kind of real mentor, is slow down. Be patient. Efficiency is overrated because it's complicated. And so one of the reasons we can learn from this king is because, or this queen or this emperor, is because it's still in a very infantile and primitive and formative sort. I mean, democracy's only been around for like 500 years, really 250 in the forms that we recognize it. And so we still really are children playing with kingship and queenship. And so in some ways these themes and patterns might be instructive to us in certain kinds of ways about teaching us to slow down and to think about other patterns. And again, like this maiden, mother, and crone, is that the woman's heroic cycle is a series of cycles that cycle. And the man's heroic cycle, the going on the journey far away from home and then coming back and not being unrecognizable, not having turned into a monster, whether it's the prodigal son or the returning hero, is being able to get back home again, and that's that. And so I want to pause here. I have a whole nother section, but first I want to stop because we just put a whole bunch of things out there, and I want to ask you guys for questions and discussion and follow-ups or anything you want to circle back around to.
I just reread Connecticut
Yankee.
And Mark Twain was onto that, obviously, because he brings in a new advisor and displaces Arthur immediately. And what was interesting was he did all the efficiency stuff. He made the place better. And by the end, the people weren't ready for it. And so it just fell back to nothing when the people weren't ready.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. I mean, there's a lot of similarities through all the different things.
Well, I think that's a great example because one of the themes of the sovereign and the sorcerer is that we don't let the sorcerer be king. We don't make the mentor into the ruler because they'll make a weird commune or a futuristic world that nobody wants to live in, or they'll be like the philosopher king who threw out all the dancers in theater. I mean, that guy is dumb. And so as part of this sort of the cautionary side of this is that you want a ruler who practices modesty and restraint and authority and wisdom that they learn from the storytelling and the mentoring tradition. But we oftentimes don't make the mentors rulers because they would oftentimes build a society that could only possibly ever be really in our future because because human beings are slow, even in positive innovation. Human beings are slow and reactive in certain kinds of ways that make that not easy. I mean, I wish we all had kitchens like the kitchens in India or toilets like the toilets in Japan. I don't know if you know about these technological wonders. but you can imagine that stand-up comedians often, and Mark Twain is one of the greatest comedians of all time. Stand-up comedians often recognize the break points where we can't progress into the future because we're not up to it yet for whatever reason, and so they can make quite a lot of fun out of how we're sort of not ready for some of the things that our material culture allows us to do. And so I think that's a fantastic example. Other thoughts or questions?
I was just gonna say, it was awesome. My brain is like opened up. I wasn't previously thinking about it, and now I'm like, oh, good Lord, I'm seeing it everywhere. Just,
You know, one of the things that I have heard from storytellers in Nepal and India and Native America and rural Appalachian America and the Ozarks of the Midwest and sort of like all the storytelling traditions I've ever been around, or the related tradition of live music playing, which is a storytelling tradition of a sort, or community theaters, which is a storytelling tradition. One of the things that I hope, and I've tried to tell students this with some real commitment, one of the things is that we can learn. We're a kind of creature that can learn. And we're a kind of creature that can imagine what we can't imagine. It's very unusual. That's may be the specifically unique thing that human beings have. My favorite phrase for this is, my dog, I don't have a dog, but I've had dogs. When I had a dog, Lucky, he was an awesome dog for that matter. When I had a dog, he could imagine the past and the future because he anticipated things. And he got upset when I was out of town. And he was happy when I came home. And so he had a knowledge of the past and the future. He had, and his brain shows us that he had most of the same root emotions that we have because he's a mammal. And so Lucky could probably wish for a brighter future, but he couldn't curse the day he was born. And that double sort of flaw and ability that human beings have, that we can imagine farther into the future, so far into the future it'll never be a future. I mean, we can imagine, infinite possible futures. We can also imagine our pasts way deeply into the past. And that ability makes us be able to dream impossible dreams and to imagine what we can't imagine and to change the world and to do every inventive and creative and wholesome thing that human beings have ever done. But it also allows us to be crackpots and to get to hook our wagon train to a deadly journey into danger because, we thought we knew what we were doing. Or we had imagined that something different was happening. Or we were imagining something over here, not paying attention to what was over there. And so part of what I think is an important takeaway from a universal themes in human literature is that we can learn things from these universal themes. They're not just entertainment. They are entertainment, and if they work well and last over time, they probably ought to be entertaining. And so I don't want to minimize or belittle that sort of exciting and aesthetic aspect of the storytelling tradition. An unmemorable story could be super wise, and if it's unmemorable, we never learn it. It might be like a technology that's too advanced for us. It's like, and so one of the reasons to think about these themes is instead of having cliches like love conquers all, because, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's just irrelevant because love had nothing to do with it. But instead, that let's look for how power and mentoring and how social roles for young and old work and pay attention to these storytelling traditions. And they might have morals, not that will tell us exactly what we're supposed to do, but will tell us the kind of people we're supposed to be, or to tell us the kind of attitude or comportment that we want to have. One of the things you can learn from Charlotte's Web or Romeo and Juliet is certain kinds of ways of being a person that do and don't work. And they don't work in the story, and they don't work in real life, or they do work in the story and they work in real life. Other thoughts or questions or ideas or
Which theme is that one?
there's a monster in the attic.
Right. I have
Um,
a question about the mixing of roles with the sovereign and the sorcerer. So the first one, the only one I could think of for a long time was the 25 Tales of the Vitala, when you have the king and the priest who's trying to like trick him so he can kill him and take his role. And at the end, the king like wises up and realizes what's going on and gets away. So I was thinking about, it seems to me that there are a lot of stories where the ruler wises up or like acquires the traits of the mentor and that's better for them. But the mentor can't acquire the power of the ruler, or it's too good, like so good it becomes bad. So like how can those mix and not mix?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's the most important, and you know, as a scholar and a teacher, I don't want to suggest that I know why that works that way. I know that's a pattern we see in storytelling, that you don't make Obi-Wan Kenobi the king of the universe. And we can have a silly, funny, comical, smart alecky reason, and that is, can't tell a good story about that. If you make a loving, nurturing, wise, well-rounded superhero the king or the queen, then we all live happily ever after. But since we don't know of any stories in which happily ever after lasts forever, or at least not stories we tell adults typically, or
Way like a story without conflict.
yeah, and so a story without conflict is not a story. That's just enjoying life. And you know, this is one of the reasons why we don't work on wisdom and self-improvement that much when things are going great. Because when things are going great, we're trying to enjoy how beautiful and amazing that is, and how we're not stressed out and we're full of energy, and we just need friendship and love. So you just need familiar creatures to share great times with. It's in mixed times where there's good and bad going on when you need to have your stuff together. Because in the best of times you can let your guard down, and in the worst of times you're just surviving. And so most of life is lived in the middle, which requires balance and discipline and learning and exercise of power and all these kinds of things. And so some of that is one of those rules of storytelling, is that, well, we don't tell stories about the best of all times, because that's a really short story. And everybody was happy. Or everybody died at the end is the negative inversion of that. Again, no story.
You can write a 3-minute song about it.
You can write a song about it. Yeah. And so if I were to get very technical and think about philosophers like Wittgenstein, he would have one kind of answer to your question, and then the French postmodernists like Foucault and his stuff with power would have a different kind of answer, and it goes something like this. Let's see if I can summarize it in a way that's easy to understand. Power corrupts, and the wise don't want it. Part of wisdom is included of like, oh, I don't want that job. I don't want that job. The Chinese famously tell the story of all the emperors and all the kings sending out one emissary after another to the great philosopher Zhuangzi, is one of the foundational figures of Taoism, and Wenzi too is another figure from this tradition. And they would find him cooking, or gardening, or looking at the clouds, possibly drinking a little wine, maybe smoking. You know, he's doing leisure activities. He's doing the activities of fishing or baking or just gazing at the clouds. And they say, we'll give you a palace and you'll be second only to the king, and you can come and be the king's mentor. And Zhuangzi said, oh, why would I ever want that job? That's a terrible job. I don't want that job. And so so let me edit what I said, is that any wizard that wants the king's job is Jafar, because Obi-Wan doesn't want that job. And so that's the mentor wizard sorcery tradition. Like, that's its own tradition. We've mostly been talking about social like social governing stories, and the wizard traditions, they have this sort of their own storytelling traditions of the hermit, or the loner, or the introvert, or so what happens in wizard stories is they go live at the bottom of a well for 14 years, or they get swallowed by a fish. They don't go and advise the king. They were supposed to go advise the king, and they got swallowed by a fish because they said, "Yeah, I'm not going to advise the king." Or they fall down a well and get lost. I mean, so wizard, that's its own storytelling tradition that we didn't really explore, but how you become a mentor instead of a householder, or a mommy or a daddy, or a king or a leader or whatever. That's the mystical prophet, shaman, witch tradition, and that's more of a loner tradition. And so their storytelling traditions are different than the socially, like fitting into society and having an ordered society traditional. And again, with the punchline being is that the wizard does not want to be king or queen.
That's Baloo from Jungle Book.
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't want to have anything. He can tell you everything about it.
But he didn't want to have anything to do with it. You know.
He just wants the bare necessity.
How are we doing?
We're at 18 after.
Any final questions? Any wrap up? I want to pitch the Goddess Conference at Marshall, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It's the 150th year anniversary of classics at Marshall University, and we're putting on a giant conference with all kinds of special speakers. And look on Facebook and look on Marshall Humanities website for that. That'll be going on all week, and there's activities. Body Shots is next week, and so there's all kinds of amazing things that are going on with that. Let's see. Any final questions? I love this. How did this work for themes? Did you like these themes better than Love Conquers All and Good Overcomes Evil?
Yes.
Another one that cycles off a whole set of different storytelling are friendship stories. That's a different one. Today I was really doing is how do we have a livable society stories. And then we have the wizard, witch, sorcerer, empowerment traditions, and that's a kind of different set of stories. And then we also have a bunch of friendship stories. And probably the best love stories and the best friendship stories are both about friendship.
But buddy cop movies.
Yeah, and all right, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Murdoch. I'm the artistic director.
Yay.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our Facebook Live audience and our recorded YouTube audience. The next in our series will be Wednesday at 6. Leah Turley will be putting on a workshop about auditioning, specifically for Shakespeare, which we have those coming up soon too. And our next production here at Alchemy is the opening night cabaret, which will be March 21st is when we're opening that. So check us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.